And we're joined by Doug Gilchrist, the city manager in Kelowna. We so appreciate you coming in here.
Thank you very much for having me.
And it's a real extension of the fact, and I mentioned this part of this interview, that the city of Kelowna makes not just yourself, but other members of staff available when people like us have questions. I didn't mention Jim Check here, as usual.
I thought I'm here too. I could just slink off to the side.
The fact that you're always available is also heartwarming. We have the 2023 annual report in front of us, and sort of to pick a topic, a lot of what the city,
it's a big report too,
has to contain in something like an annual report is addressing this incredible growth rate that the city of Kelowna has. Are we right there?
Absolutely. The annual report serves a number of purposes. Some of it is legislative transparency around financials and so on. But what we've tried to do with the annual report is make it a story that people can actually read and find out and learn about not only how their tax dollars are being spent, but what's going on in their city today and what they can look forward to in the future. And you're right, growth is one of the biggest pressures we have. Trying to manage the old with the new in terms of development, facilities, and all of those types of things that we'll probably talk about today.
163,000 people.
And that's an old number now, and growing.
So what does that look like in 10 years? Do you guys have a projection for that?
Yeah, so we have our 2040, 2050 growth projections, and then we have regional projections as well. And there's always a margin of error within that, but sustained growth over the long term, not just for Kelowna, but for the region, is the MO. And we know that the infrastructure to go along with that and services has to be our focus to maintain the quality of life that we have here.
What's that number? Like 2030, 2040?
2040 number, 190,000, another 50,000 kind of thing over the 2040 horizon.
In the city of Kelowna proper kind of thing?
Yeah.
So that's big growth, right?
Huge growth.
And so I guess the trick or the thing is, how do you manage all that growth, obviously with infrastructure and transportation corridors, and housing is one of the big components of it?
Yeah, so the housing pressure is the one that I think we've been talking about most lately. It gets a lot of attention in the media. It's the one the council is most involved in terms of their approvals. And we're only the conduit. We don't build housing. We shouldn't build housing as a municipality. We're the conduit to ensuring good development happens. So there's always going to be tension, I think, between what existed in the past or today with what needs to exist in the future to house all these people. So densification.
Right. I mean, you don't build, but you approve projects. And there's certain parts of the community that are always, pushing back, that don't like to see this pace of growth. And so while the city is trying to accommodate their growth with all of this densification, some people say, oh, no, you're just having more and more of these high dense projects built, which is just attracting more people, speeding the growth.
Yeah, and this is not a new term, but you can't stop growth. You need to manage it, and I think how well you manage it is a judgment of how well how thoughtful we are in the type of and form of development that happens in our city, and the engagement opportunities for the public to have and what that form takes. But you can look at cities that have tried to stop growth or limited sprawl and things like that, and it just leapfrogs, right? So if we say, here's a permanent urban growth boundary, which we have one, and within that permanent growth boundary, we're also going to limit density and height, right, which means no more growth here. What happens? Now we're going to have it in Lake Country, West Kelowna, and somewhere else. We'll have further problems related to commuting and congestion and GHG emissions and all of those things.
You said something that before we went on live here that resonated with me in your management style, that for developments, you'd rather see the city and the city employees act more as a partner as opposed to an adversarial relationship with some of the developers. Sure.
A combative environment, regardless of the business you're in, it might work to get you through a negotiation, but it doesn't work in the long term. And a municipality is here forever. The relationships we build and the culture that we have with the city really makes a difference to how we evolve. When I think of the development industry, some people will say on one end of the spectrum, oh, the evil developer that's just here to exploit as much revenue as they can and then parachute out of the community. On the other end of the spectrum, is probably more where I sit, is they're a partner in building our city. None of us here or most of the citizens in the community, they don't build much of anything. They contribute dollars to infrastructure. And the private sector builds the homes we live in, many of the roads that are here, and contribute to the facilities. So to me, the development industry is a partner no different than any other business in our community. In fact, it's one of our largest businesses in the community in terms of an industry.
Especially with that growth rate.
They employ people, they house people, and so on. So I think the partnership perspective with the development industry is absolutely critical.
Part of your job is to set that culture kind of for the city too, right? And the staff and how you deal with the public.
Yeah. So I think it was about 2008 when the planning department was given to me as part of my responsibility by the previous city manager. And I think culture was one of the important things that we addressed right away was how do they view themselves, the planners and the building and permitting folks, how do they view themselves as part of the puzzle? Are you a regulator or are you a partner? And I think we've shifted over the course of time to strictly a regulator to a partner or a facilitator of good quality development, right thing in the right place in the right building form.
Right. So we're seeing more and more of these high rises. I have mixed feelings about them, mostly positive, I think. Mm-hmm. But I look at some other cities like Vancouver and I see sometimes a little more flair and imagination in terms of what a structure can look like. Are we at the point now where we can start asking developers to do something that is perhaps a little more eye-catching or different or adds to the landscape?
Yeah, I think that high quality design is desirable for everyone. Everybody likes to walk down the street and feel good about what they're looking at or be wowed by a high-rise building or something like that. It does come with a price tag. And at the same time, we're fighting this affordability challenge, right? So there's a balance to be struck, particularly in the kind of that middle range of housing, that 4 to 6 story mid-rise buildings. You can ask for some things to try and make them more aesthetically pleasing. You know, the ground-oriented part of it is really important.
Wouldn't one good example of that be the Brooklyn and Bernard on the Block? Because you took, what was it, bargain or something like that was there before, and now you have, and that has some architectural kind of like flair in it too, like the Bernard on the Block one, and the two other towers are kind of typical towers, but the commercial side of it looks a little more like they put a little more architecture into that.
Yeah,
for sure.
Very interesting. And on that one, particularly the ground plane, when that's finished, they've got a little water feature and restaurants that spill out onto the sidewalk, and think that's important. Being able to afford to do that, we get a lot of density on that site, right? We get a lot of height.
Yeah, because
and
bargain was what was there, right? Which was
three towers and quite a bit of height affords them to do a little more interesting design.
Yeah. Looking to the future, I mean, this is a great report. People should go online. You go to Kelowna.ca. You'll find the report there somewhere under the annual report. You can go through it yourself. There's lots of really good stuff in there. But I imagine the past has a lot to do with where we're going to go, though, too, right? So how do we plan for the future? And I think you and I talked a little bit before we went on it as well as about what the city's future looks like, where you're going. I mean, obviously we have an airport that gets busier and busier every year. That's part of the stuff you guys deal with. Housing is a big part of it, and then transportation.
Yeah, I think thanks for that, Jim, because it really is. It's a building block. Every year in the annual report, you'll see us moving forward with our strategies, and at times those strategies have to shift and change depending on the landscape, political or otherwise. But there's some really exciting things that are in the budget that are multi-year items. The things that are probably most tangible for people, our citizens, are capital works. The road networks, the facilities that get built, the pedestrian overpasses, the rec facilities. So the two big ones that I'm probably most excited about in the capital realm are it's called the Building Stronger Kelowna project with this Parkinson Rec Center, the multi-use facilities in Glenmore, Rutland, and the Mission. Which totals, the 300 million plus. We have another 400 million over the next about 8 years at the airport for that whole airport campus, employment, aerospace, technology, hotel, tourism visitors, all that comes with that investment in that campus. And then the next one that the community will see more of in the 2025 budget coming up in December is a transportation bundle. So really acknowledging what was a high priority of council and a big issue for the community leading into the last election was how are we going to deal with all of our congestion and put more money into moving people around our city in different ways. Transit, multimodal, walking, bikes, bicycle, and vehicle networks.
All right, I've got to bring it up then. 'Cause
Oh, no.
we're at the
Here we go.
transportation part.
What? I opened a door.
Yeah, the door is now open, and
All right.
the love
I know where you're going.
The love train is driving through that door because Gordon Lovegrove,
Yes.
he's a university prof as well as a member of council, and he has repeatedly raised the prospect of his tram train, and now there is published in a scientific journal his I guess research on this, which includes economic feasibility. But it seems whenever this subject comes up, he just gets laughed off. Like it's pie in the sky. So is it officially in the pie in the sky?
Well, I'm not official, so I won't officially say anything other than to
putting you on the spot. Right
I will acknowledge a few things. So first is transportation, moving people around and through our city is a top priority of council, and that is not exclusive to vehicles or multimodal transportation. It's a broad priority that says bring us all the solutions to move people around our city. So we've got to address it in all facets. Cycling corridors, off-road bike paths, improved transit, improved vehicles, and looking at alternatives that we don't have, which would include things like the rail solution or the rail option. The component that's most current, I would say, in that is the section from downtown to the airport. That portion of the rail trail that we acquired about 8 years ago, I would say now, is a current study area for us to figure out what multimodal transportation on that corridor looks like.
Would that spoil it as a? We seem to have just left the tram train in the station, or maybe it would shift because when Gordon Lovegrove talks about it, it's usually following the Highway 97.
You could use a raised.
Okay, so let's hold that aside
here.
there. And so are you suggesting that we could still have a rail trail that we would go biking on and share it with some sort
Unquestionably. That corridor, and I happened to be at the negotiating table when we acquired that, the vision when we bought that corridor that we sold to the province and the feds who helped invest in that was it would be multimodal transportation, meaning cycling, vehicles, and some other alternate mode. Could be rail. Could be autonomous self-drive minibuses until rail is more viable. It could be many different things. The corridor is wide enough to accommodate it all.
Vehicles? In other words, a roadway.
Correct.
How many lanes could you?
So if we had a public report that went to council on Monday that acknowledged that the Clement Avenue, where it hits Spall right now, from Spall to ultimately the university, there is a Highway 33 extension, as it's been called in the past, or the Central Okanagan Multimodal Corridor, or the Glenmore Bypass, all of those titles. That corridor can accommodate, in the future, vehicles, perhaps an alternate mode, and the rail trail.
But then it just becomes a highway with a bike lane. It's not a rail trail anymore.
No, it would absolutely be separated by rail trail.
All right.
I have a question that's a big challenge for many people in the Okanagan. And it's one that we kind of face every year, especially as we come into summer, and it's wildfires. It's like usually people are on pins and needles when we have 5, 6 hot days in a row, 7 hot days in a row that they're expecting to wake up to a wildfire. How are we in the future kind of like to work on that, or what are we doing to kind of mitigate that?
Big question. I think fuel modification programs and doing fire smart programs is a really important immediate piece that we do today and we can do a better job of right away. It needs funding. It needs provincial, perhaps federal funding to support us. But fuel modifications, we saw through the parts of the wildfire that hit our community last year, how well that works. We saw it in Glenmore and around Wilden, up around the landfill. We saw those areas burn clean, burn more quickly through the areas, and give the opportunity for the firefighters to do a better job more quickly.
And then building materials, how big a role is that? Building
materials for me is huge. I think for all of those neighborhoods that are on interfaces, there's an opportunity for us to have a discussion about what the building code should be for those areas throughout the province. So if we go back and rebuild the neighborhoods that burned last year with the same materials as we did before, I think we're doing ourselves a disservice. If we have asphalt shingles and wooden decks and all of put all the plantings back that we had there before, we haven't learned anything. So I think we really do need to be looking at it from a policy basis, and building materials is a big one.
I think insurance companies may drive some of that too in risk mitigation. They may drive some of those.
I hope so.
Those things and saying, well, we're not going to insure that, right? Because if you have like 20 pine trees around your home and you got an asphalt shingle or cedar shakes even for that matter, right? So their risk is obviously higher than somebody that has a steel roof or metal roof and hardy plank or something that doesn't burn on the side of the building.
You bet. Yep.
You know, when a wildfire is threatening a community, the first thing that the wildfire firefighters are working on is getting in and building a guard around the valued structures. So, you know, when I wildly think this out, and I'm no expert in the field, I think about a city like Kelowna pretending there's a wildfire threatening the whole circumference. And, you know, pick a line, someone's going to be outside it, and build, you know, some sort of a you could use it as a biking corridor, but, you know, prepare it ahead of time.
Yeah, I won't profess to be an expert in this. And there's a lot of the expertise emerging out there with the level of wildfires that are happening around the globe. But if you think of the idea of a protected area like you're talking about, fire break, Okanagan Lake's a pretty good fire break.
Sure is.
And it didn't work last year. So I'm not sure that the solution really is where we want to go, and, you know, just blow down all the forests around all of our communities. But one of the emerging thoughts is to bring back a more prescribed burning than we've seen in the past, which is unpalatable to a lot of people, right? You're burning forests, you have smoke, you have air quality issues. But I think that is something we're going to see a lot more discussion about, is greater amounts of prescribed burns. And the other piece that I want to bring up is early detection. So if you think of hurricanes and tornadoes, early detection saves lives. Early detection on wildfire, technology is going to play a role in that. You know, we used last year when we had the landfill fire, we put drones up with thermal detection, and we knew exactly where the hot spots were. We took that data off the drones, downloaded it to the iPads of the fire teams, and they went out in the morning, and we had that landfill out and up and running within 5 days. So technology plays a big role about detecting hotspots early and quickly, pinpointing attack. And also through some of we were talking offline again about this, the sensory technology to predict areas of high risk.
Right. Are we ready to shift on a different topic?
Sure. Well, let's just talk about the airport for a little bit. I mean, that is becoming one of the busiest airports in Canada. You're doing a big expansion out there. And if you looked at the airport area 10 years ago and you look at it today, huge difference, right? I mean, you're talking about all the businesses that are out there. There's hotels out there now. There's restaurants out there. Excuse me. And there's obviously the universities out there as well, right? So what does that look like in the next 10 years? What can we expect?
Yeah, very exciting. And I'm glad you brought it up, because it's probably one of the things that you know, back at the hall when we were talking about the future of the city, this is one of the key pillars that we're actually responsible for, as opposed to some industries that we want to support. But the growth of the airport is fantastic. The team is really strong out there right now, with the parkade, the hotel expansion, and support for KF Aerospace and where they've come from, and where they're
the biggest. Well, they are the biggest employer now, right?
Where they're biggest private sector employer, where they're going to continue to go is awesome. So where we can bolster that aerospace industry, you know, if you think back a generation of what the aerospace industry did to Seattle with Boeing, what could the aerospace industry look like in a technological world in Kelowna? And I think that's a really intriguing piece for us to think about supporting that industry long term.
I mean, that brings more people into the area. Obviously, it drives our tourism, drives our resorts that we have around here, Big White and all that kind of stuff. Bringing people in, like in 4 seasons, we have golf, we have wine, we have, you know, skiing, and we have that big lake out there. Some pretty nice assets, right? Speaking of the lake, obviously that's a jewel of the Okanagan. How do we kind of I know you guys are doing some stuff to manage that lake, and, you know, like risks to the lake and that, like where does the lake fit into the kind of like your planning?
I mean, it's the lifeblood of the area. Without that, we don't have much, physically or physiologically or otherwise. So the whole one valley, one water work that's been going on with the Okanagan Basin Water Board, the irrigation districts, First Nations, other communities, I think is excellent and needs to stay as a top priority. Protecting from things like invasive mussels and all of that is a priority. And it has to stay there.
Because our lake is basically a river system, though, too, starting in Cal and moving down through Okanagan Lake and then into...
all the way through the valley.
Yeah, all the way and into the Columbia River.
Yep.
I probably, maybe not a fair question, but if ever there was like a slight hint of invasive mussels got into one specific, corner of the lake, is there anything you can throw at that problem to stop it? Or is it just like, oh, it's done? Oh.
Well, I think that's a scientific question than I can
Maybe
answer.
not a fair question.
But I can say, on the Snake River down south of the border, where that occurred, they threw everything at it that they could, and they tried chemical interventions and so on with some success. But what the impacts of that have been on other species and things, I think, are yet to be determined. So a province-wide or even a national response plan that's more robust than where we are today, I think, is warranted. That's probably the point I would take out of that.
Yeah.
We don't want to keep you all day, but is there some stuff that you'd want to touch on in this annual report or what the future looks like?
Probably the only thing that might be useful for some of your listeners to hear about is digital transformation. And that's a corporate priority for me and my team, well supported by our council, to provide services to our citizens in a more digital way. So when you think of how people used to procure goods yesterday versus today, the mall at Amazon, how they used to view movies and television, clicking the channels through to where they are today, Netflix and others. We see ourselves as going through the similar evolution to provide service to our citizens so that everything is available to them 24/7, fully digital, all the time in a format they're accustomed to. I want the citizens to be able to have a similar digital experience when they're dealing with the city as they would any of those other entities. We should not be a lesser standard. So when you think of, say, I use the example of you've got an Alexa or a Google sitting at home and you want to know when your garbage is picked up, you can ask it and say, it'll tell you, it's going to be on Thursday and recycling's on Friday. Don't go put it out and then take it back. I've registered the profile of my family into the system, into the single portal, protected, secure data source. And you want to know when your daughter should be registering for the next gymnastics event that fits her age category, and it's automated for you. Like some of those things will very quickly become quite systematic for the city and all of our citizens. And I really, really have a strong emphasis on making sure they have a great digital experience and that things are more readily available to them all.
Right. So, and I guess it's not just making things available digitally, but also taking that opportunity to speed someone's experience through with whatever they need from the city.
Unquestionably. The building and permitting is probably one of the areas we are the most advanced right now. In fact, probably certainly leading the province, maybe the country, in completely changing the business process, not just making things more digital, but changing the business process. So the vision, as an example anyway, a vision in that area is someone can digitally submit their building plans or their development application. If it's fully compliant, building code, fire code, the zoning bylaw, the official community plan, if it's fully compliant and it can be reviewed by an AI system or backed system, why would there need to be a human intervention in that? Could it or should it?
Speed,
efficiency. Could it or should it just be issued?
Something could be instantaneous that otherwise would be 2 weeks or even 2 months.
And it could even spit out what's wrong. Like, these are the things that need to be addressed.
Digital iterations.
Are we too far deep to get into a whole different topic?
You can if you want. Go ahead. I don't know.
I mean, we have
Doug.
You can always cut afterwards.
That's true. A lot of this we need to cut.
The cutting room floor.
That's what we should call it. Serious.
This is live. There's no cutting.
I'm always a big supporter of every effort that the city cooperates with the province to build housing for people who don't have anything, right? Mm-hmm. And now we see on Agassiz Road, one of the city-backed
Stevens Village.
It's kind of going haywire right now. A lot of the residents are pretty upset about it. We even talked to some people who live there, and they're not happy about how it's being operated either. So I guess, it's difficult work, but, what do you say about all that?
It is very difficult work, and I don't think I need to explain to anyone how difficult that population is to work with, and in some cases manage. There's a much bigger picture solution today that isn't what we're doing today. Right now, the housing of folks is really important. The services that we provide them to try and change the trajectory of their lives is critically important, but it is very difficult and cumbersome, trying, and expensive work. I feel for some of the residents that are getting the impact of this, where people are living without accountability or responsibility. Our job as a city, at least in part, is to manage that as best we can. When these things come forward from residents, we need to respond immediately, tactfully, and respectfully for both sides.
I think
we're trying to do that.
Like, obviously, those services need to be provided. But at some point, they need to figure out, just like any neighbor, like if Kent and I were neighbors and I was acting, like what's damaging his enjoyment of his property,
which is quite probable.
Which is, I think that would be the goal, to have it so that you're not infringing on other people's
unquestionably
enjoyment of their own property.
And some of the things, because you're referencing the videos that were shown and so on. I want to really be clear. Some of those things there is a responsibility of the operator of the building to deal with the things that happen within the building or on the periphery of the building. But many of those things that are happening on the street have very little to do with the operator or within the operator's control.
There's sort of a large spectrum of how much connection there is to the building. But you've got that concentrated population of people who have, in some cases, drug addictions, who then interact with people who aren't there. So to some extent, that continuum is related, and who knows where to draw the line. But there definitely is a call for a little more oversight in the general area around there.
Unquestionably.
And I have seen more. I was just around yesterday, and I saw a couple of bylaw vehicles of different types circling the area, kind of taking care of business a little bit.
Absolutely. When the community raises these things up to us, we do respond. Sometimes it's just an intervention that has to take place, and higher levels of patrol, moving people on, getting them into different types of services they might need. But
because those people have a right to their sidewalk, or they should, right? The people who live like across the street.
Peaceful enjoyment, yes.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, that's a difficult one. And I know one of the people say, it's not being run very well. Well, I mean, having highly trained and patient and loving people to operate all these facilities must get difficult. We keep building more of them, and awesome employees to run these. They're not dropping out of trees.
So it's become an industry.
Yeah.
And like any industry, we have to make sure there's appropriately trained number of people to help run the industry. And it's a difficult one. It's not one that's for everybody. Not everybody wants to be in that field.
I'll leave it with this last question. We talked earlier as well. Instead of like looking at incremental changes, sometimes it's you're saying the city will take a look and a step back and say, what are we trying to accomplish? And then try to move to that solution, as opposed to like making small advancements in taking a long time. How do you see some of those playing out more quickly, or where do you see that? Like, I'll just give an example, robo-taxi or something. Like you talked about automated buses and stuff like that. Where do you think, like, moving people obviously is going to be one of those big solutions, especially if our population goes to 200,000. So moving people throughout the city and autonomous buses and stuff like that.
It probably applies to a lot of our different services. But let's say the airport as an example. We're building an expansion to the airport. We will have improved circulation through the airport, getting through security. Now you can build more security lines and have people bring out the tray and go through the X-ray machine and do that.
Can we work on that?
Or you can look at a technology that we've had lots of discussions about, is touchless travel. How can we move from there to, through technology and automation, it knows when you arrive at the airport, it knows when you're going through. You don't have to bring out your passport and your ticket.
So kind of like the next thing, just at another level, right?
A whole nother level. Yeah. And I don't want to freak people out and say it's they're going to look at your eyes.
I saw some of it when I think I was coming from Vegas, and they take your picture the first time, and then that's it. Like it's just all facial recognition through the rest of your thing. So there's no more. They don't ask for your ticket when you're boarding the plane. They don't ask for like when you're going through another security thing. It's just like you've been scanned once and you're done.
Yeah. And one of the other thing I'll say is it's around the culture of thinking, and not just of city employees, but everyone. Is you're here for a period, and you may be in your role for a period of time. So if I'm the city manager for 10 years, I've got a window to try and advance things. If you do incrementalism, it takes a very long time to get some things done. If you think in the political world, they may be here for 4 years, maybe 8 years, maybe 12 if they are lucky in a third run. But really thinking of windows of time of how much you can get accomplished during that time. Think big, be bold. Societally, regulatory will always dial you back to what's possible. So I really encourage my teams and our elected officials to think as big as possible.
All right. Go love train.
That's how we get to Mars.
All right.
We thank you for your time as usual, Doug.
And thank you guys very much. Enjoy it.
Thanks for watching Kelowna Now.